Hi, everybody. Hello. I want to tell you about objective and phenomenological methods in consciousness studies with reference to spirit mediumship. In natural sciences, especially, but also in all of mainstream normal science, we expect a lot of objective methodology. And in fact, at this conference, we've seen a lot of great examples of it from people like Dean Radin. For example, controlled laboratory experimental designs. We sociologists and anthropologists use a lot of phenomenological methods in participant observation and in ethnographic interviewing, where we're trying to get people to talk about their views of the world. If we want an example in parapsychology, we could look at Pamela Ray Heath's article in 2000 in the Journal of Parapsychology, The PK Zone, a phenomenological study, where she has people talk about their mental states during their psychokinetic experiences. One of the great advantages of objective methodology, of course, is for uncovering mundane explanations and trying to eliminate those explanations to see if we really have an anomaly that needs to be explained. For example, Gary Schwartz, in the Afterlife Experiments, 2002, developed increasingly stricter protocols for testing spirit mediums' performance in a laboratory setting and contrasting them to a control group of guessers. We've got a lot of good objective data such as this in the areas of spirit mediumship, NDEs, apparitions or ghosts, and reincarnation, but there's still a debate as to whether we've got evidence for survival of consciousness after bodily death, rather than merely some kind of psi among the living, psychic abilities among the living. This is a very interesting debate. We're stuck for a specific mechanism that would explain either how psi or survival would work. Maybe the mechanisms are the same, but we would still like to know the source of the information from psi with a living person as opposed to psi from a spirit, let's say. There are interesting theories of hidden order that are consistent with the data. Look at Dean Radin, for example, Entangled Minds, 2006, and talking about non-local connections in quantum physics. Okay, here's an idea. Why don't we just get rid of all the objective methods and go to the phenomenological methods? Let's just ask spirit mediums if they're really talking to dead people, and that'll settle it once for all. Bad idea. I teach sociological research methods, and I am a fan of multiple methodologies and point out there are always advantages and disadvantages of all the methods. Now it's time for me to tell you how I've used phenomenological methods in studying spirit mediums. First of all, as a sociologist and an anthropologist, I see this all in terms of sociology of knowledge. And so the first question is, why do we even ask this question about whether there's survival of spirit in a scientific way? If you look in traditional Chinese culture, and you can get an example of this from my book, Chinese Ghosts and ESP, 1982, which has a section on spirit mediums, the Chinese perspective would ordinarily be that you take spirit mediumship for granted, and the question is whether this particular spirit medium is bringing through your grandfather. But in this society, science is the dominant legitimate way of knowing. Next point is that some people in this society put the phenomenological personal experience of consciousness ahead of the objective scientific perspective. Skip Atwater, who was director of research at the Monroe Institute for 20 years, told me in a recent interview that he has been spending a lot of time gathering evidence to demonstrate what he knows is, quote, obviously true, unquote. In other words, he uses both objective and phenomenological approaches. For the past 15 years, my wife Penelope and I have studied spirit mediums in the United States. This is our book, Guided by Spirit, Journey into the Mind of the Medium, 2003. It's mostly a phenomenological approach, as you can tell from the title. Minds of mediums, asking them to describe their own process. And surprise, most of the 40 mediums we interviewed and the 82 mediums whose biographies I analyzed have been at least somewhat skeptical of the survival hypothesis. This is in the Western world, right? Nearly all mediums look for confirmations, that is, feedback that their readings are correct. Also, mediums often embrace a psi explanation for their readings. They'll say, that was just a psychic reading that I did, or I read that person's aura instead of getting the information from the spirit world like I was supposed to here in Lilydale. Now, here's a nice example of a confirmation that some people would say leans toward a survival interpretation, at least because it seems to eliminate telepathy among the living. The medium told the unknown sitter in a telephone reading, "Your deceased Aunt Ruth is here." Yes, I had an Aunt Ruth. "She wants you to have a ruby ring, her ruby ring. It's in a secret compartment at the back of the second drawer in her dresser, which is now in your mother's house." Nobody in the family knew anything about this ring, but they found it just where the medium said it was going to be and called her back. The medium was my wife, Penelope. An objective scientist would probably object to using Penelope's phenomenological report, especially since she's one of the authors of the book. To me, my knowledge of Penelope increases the validity of the account. Now, here's another zinger. By the way, zingers do not happen all the time. This case also erodes my academic respectability even further. I appear as a commentator in the TV documentary Ghosts of Gettysburg, which has been on national cable TV over 60 times. I know it's been on because I get all these emails, letters, and phone calls the next day. Before that show was produced, this was in 1995, Penelope took her first trip to Gettysburg and to Little Round Top on the Gettysburg battlefield on 2 consecutive days in early July on the anniversary of the battle. Now, Penelope knew little or nothing about the Northern General Joshua Chamberlain at that time, but she apparently channeled him on those 2 days. It seemed to be like an obsession case rather than possession, because she could see the battlefield as it was now, as it is now, and as it was then, and have a conversation with Chamberlain in her head. There were a lot of evidential details, such as she said he was trying to get a letter to Sarah, which turned out to be the name of his mother and also the name of his sister. And Penelope felt a pain. She had a difficulty walking because of a pain in her left hip and her right ankle, which we found out later were the 2 places that Chamberlain had been injured in the Battle of Gettysburg. Now, 6 years later, in 2001, I got an email from a woman who had seen the TV show, Ghosts of Gettysburg, and she told me that she thought the spirit of Joshua Chamberlain was trying to enter her body. And this happened about 100 yards from where Penelope had had her experience, and it was also in early June. This is the only obsession or possession case I've ever gotten from the hundreds of people who have contacted me when they want to tell me about their ghost experiences in Gettysburg. And at that time, Penelope's experience had not been published anywhere. Later on, I found out that Chamberlain often revisited the battlefield on the anniversary of the battle when he was still alive. Does he continue to visit the battlefield on the anniversary of the battle after his death? Did I tell you that other woman had that also in early July? And what kind of explanation do you need in order to explain this case in terms of super psi? Now, let's take the phenomenological approach one step further and demolish what little is left of my academic reputation, at least in sociology, if not in SSE. Participatory science. Participatory science involves the researcher moving away from objectivity at a distance and jumping right into the study itself. This is like Dr. Jekyll taking his own potion and turning into Mr. Hyde. Bad things happen to you, especially in the tenure committee. In sociology and anthropology, participant observation approaches participatory science. But you're not supposed to go native. I went native. I became a spirit medium. He was supposed to study spirit mediums, not become one. But I think this was the best part of my part of the study. What better way to do a phenomenological study than leap whole hog into the phenomenon itself? I think I still have a pretty good dose of skepticism anyway, because I really want to know what's going on. I study this stuff because I have a curiosity addiction, like everybody else in this room. And so for me to fool myself would be like cheating at solitaire. Like, what's the point? So, I really do have, actually, the spirit mediums think I'm a skeptic, actually. Now, as described in Guided by Spirit, lo and behold, I've had zingers too. Not all the time, but lots of them. From a phenomenological perspective, I can tell you there is something going on here. I can't prove it's survival, even though it feels like it. And the objective perspective in me says that it would be irresponsible science to ignore the evidence for at least some kind of psi activity in the good cases of spirit mediumship. I'm going to give you one of many examples of my own experience that convinced me. I actually give messages in spiritualist churches and sometimes in public services in Lilydale, New York. That's a spiritualist community near Buffalo. But I'm chicken because I always doubt that I can do it. So I asked my spirit guide, time for you to roll your eyes. I asked my spirit guide to give me messages before I go, like while I'm still in the bathtub. So I'll have something to say when I get there. One time I got 2 rather detailed messages, and I wrote them down before I went. I didn't want to have my mind make this up after the fact, so I had them written down before I went. One was for the littlest girl who's not a baby, and told about her skill in music and so on. And the other one was for a guy with a beard, and I could see him standing there in my mind's eye, and told about how his relatives on the other side were holding signs and jumping up and down and telling him he didn't appreciate himself enough. When I got to the outdoor service, I could recognize the guy out of the 300 people there, and I could easily figure out who was the littlest girl who wasn't a baby. But then, before I had a chance to give these messages, another spirit medium stood up and gave the exact message I was going to give to this guy. And then another medium stood up and gave the message to the little girl I was going to give, except that she said dance instead of music. I was pretty blown away. And I thought about the odds of picking the right person out of 300, times doing it a second time, like 1 in 90,000, times getting a detailed message right one time, times getting another detailed message almost exactly right. And remember, I had many zinger experiences, not just this one. Okay, so what's the status of this knowledge? From the perspective of normal mainstream science, it's totally worthless. I never even gave those messages. But a researcher using a phenomenological approach could interview me and compare my subjective experiences to those of other mediums, which of course is what we did in our book. In conclusion, I'm arguing for the usefulness of phenomenological methods, but I also see that it's great to combine objective and phenomenological. Actually, Gary Schwartz does this to some extent. You can see it in his book where he talks about his medium's own feelings in the afterlife experiments. And this might be a synchronicity. The day after I prepared this talk, what do you know? I got the latest issue of JSE, and what do you know? There's a phenomenological study of 8 mediums by Rock, Beischel, and Gary Schwartz. I also think we should keep after the search for physical mechanisms, looking at the brain maybe as a quantum computer, setting up non-local connections between brain and mind. We need multiple methodologies for the mysterious. And if you'd like to be part of my new Sociology of Science study of consciousness and survival, please see my half-page ad in the program. We could at least do a short email interview. Or maybe I'll see you next year. This is going to take me years. I'm doing a documentary and a book, and I love doing long projects. Thank you.
Okay, we have a bit of time for questions, and
Dick Schaub. This is great because it seems to me that so much of what is usually called consciousness can be explained as epiphenomena of the brain, and I think that the term gets bandied about way, way too much. But this really lands on things that I'm interested in particular the evidence for reincarnation, mediumship, several other things that just strongly suggest there's either survival or there's imprinting into the environment of someone's consciousness or living
yes.
Activities, something like that. And I think rather than explore more evidence with mediums, how much of your activities are trying to figure out what the mechanism might be or to parse the kinds of information that you're getting back as opposed to just validating the phenomena itself and proving that there's something real to it.
I live vicariously. I'm a sociologist. So when I did my study of UFOs, it was actually a study of UFO researchers, 91 UFO researchers. And that's what I'm doing now in my recent study, is I want to study the sociology of science, how people create this knowledge about consciousness. So I'm fascinated with everything. I mean, everything from the tubercules in the neurons or whatever it is, but I can't do that myself. But I'm going to talk about it. I'm going to be like John Horgan and you know, kind of a journalist of science by bringing all these perspectives together. It's really amazingly fascinating to see what these different people are saying about consciousness. So yes, but I can't do it myself. Yes.
Rosemary Pilkington here.
Yes.
I'm so glad to see more people getting into this field, which most people here know is my favorite field to be in. Right now I'm more interested in physical phenomena, but this is the same thing. Asking mediums who are spiritualists, of course, they're going to think that what they're getting is from spirit. But there's really no proof of that. And
right.
I don't like the term super psi.
Okay.
No
well,
one knows the extent
neither does
of
Dean Radin.
our psi abilities.
Yeah.
If all the things we've been hearing at this conference are true, there's no limit as to time or place or whatever. So what you are getting, for instance, when you picked up these precognitions, I think they are.
Could easily be.
What's going on, yeah.
I understand that.
Yeah, you can get things clairvoyantly,
Right.
precognitively, whatever, so it doesn't prove anything.
Yeah.
It reminded me of something you said of Eileen Garrett when she was asked, because she would go into trance and produce these fantastic
Right.
things. She would take on the personalities of people, produce channel people, whatever.
Right.
And they said, do you believe that there is an afterlife and that you're really in communication? And she said, on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, I believe.
Yep.
On Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday, I don't believe, and on Sunday, you know.
Exactly. She's one of the 122 mediums in my database, yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm as interested in why people think certain things is evidence for survival as I am in the question of survival. I mean, I'm interested in everything, including that.
Dave Leiter here. Do you use meditation as part of your psychic ability?
Me?
Yes.
My little, poor little me, spirit medium? Yes, I do.
Okay.
Yes, I do.
Have you ever interrupted meditation and seen what the effect is?
It doesn't seem to matter very much because I can go in just like that now. Now, my wife, who's really a spirit medium, I mean, if I can do it, anybody can do it, really. But she is very serious about meditating a half hour ahead of time before she does her professional mediumship. But you know, one of the nice things about our book is we've got like what percentage of people meditate, what percentage had spirit guides who were male versus female in the 19th century compared to the 20th century. Nobody's got a database like that. But you can look for stuff like that and find out what people think about those modalities. Thank you.
The evidence which is often considered most convincing for the actual existence of these people after death, sorry, Emmons Baruch right here.
Hi.
After death is that the mediums will behave like their personalities will
Yes.
take on some of the characteristics.
My wife
and
does
so
that.
on. Okay,
Yeah.
I was going to ask you if you had any
Especially in
examples of
China.
that.
Oh, especially in China. They're much more likely to go into deeper trance in China. Mediums don't like to do that these days, mostly in the United States. But yeah, oh yeah. And my wife would look at her arms. She said, look at this rash I'm getting. And the guy says, that's the rash my grandfather had. You've got it. You know? And then, but she doesn't talk like people or imitate other things, but she'll get feelings. Yeah. That's quite fascinating to me, yeah.
One more very quick question.
I know that Raymond Moody had people gazing in black mirrors to
Yes.
see their departed ones. I wondered if you had done any kind of work like that.
We've
or
been
talked
trying.
to people.
We've tried that in Lilydale. There are a number of people who've done their own little psychomanthiums, and we haven't gotten much. But I'm interested in that too. Thank you.